Hi, I'm Dr. George Blatty. I've been a family physician here in Lynbrook, Malvern for the past 30 years. And as many of you know, we've had a series of programs on health subjects of interest to the local people. And tonight, we would like to address a particular problem that has been in the news and is of a deep concern to so many of us, and that's the swine flu. The major purpose of this discussion is just to tell you about the swine flu, to tell you what it is, and more importantly, what it isn't. I get the sense, as many of the people that I speak to have, and that is that we're on the verge of a major disaster. If not by content, certainly by volume, the public press is telling us so much about the swine flu that it gets confusing. Swine flu is not new. It was first introduced into the population in the 1930s and has been found from year after year in the swine population. And the people in the pork industry are very familiar with how to deal with that. But in 1976, there was an outbreak of swine flu influenza in New Jersey. At Fort Dix, the swine flu virus was introduced into this population where there were 200 cases at Fort Dix and 1 death. In 1988, a woman in Wisconsin, a 42-year-old woman who was pregnant, attended her local county fair, and 4 days later came down with influenza, and 4 days later died. 3 health workers in that same hospital were found to be seropositive to influenza A, but they didn't develop serious illness. And it was thought that her exposure to this large swine exhibit at the local county fair was the cause of her disease. When they further looked into this, it was determined that 76% or thereabouts of exhibitors or people that were involved with these swine exhibitions were antibody positive or seropositive to the swine flu, or the H1N1 virus. So the virus has been in the community before, and in and of itself doesn't pose any more of a threat to you and I as the normal influenza poses to us every year. And in truth, in this past year, we had a very mild influenza season. Late in the season, we had a new strain that was not covered in the vaccines that were distributed for us, but no major morbidity or even mortality was found. There was no change in what we predicted would happen. The swine flu was named because this particular virus, which is an influenza A virus, was propagated among pigs. Now, the reality is that influenza virus is the same basic virus that we deal with every year. So what we have now is basically the emergence of an influenza strain that is part of this year's illness, but has a different ring to it. Now, what's different about this? The reason people are very concerned about this particular event is that the influenza A virus has gotten into the swine population, and the potential exists for various other influenza A viruses or different strains, maybe the avian flu, the bird flu, strains from humans or from other species can then what's called reallocate. And that means that they can switch genes inside the host. And when that host then spreads the virus to other animals or humans, it's an entirely different virus, has a different virility to it, has a different implication, and will make it much harder for us to prevent or to treat, to make vaccines for. And because that strain could be very, very difficult to deal with, it could have wide-ranging implications for us here in Nassau County as well as across the United States. It's important that we're talking about this tonight because various directives are coming out from the people in the local government and federal government. Today we received, physicians that is, received information from the county that the people who may have swine flu would only be tested if they were rather ill and in the hospital. That's of interest because here in my own office, I've gotten numerous calls from people thinking that they had the swine flu. Could they come over and get tested for the swine flu? Should they run to the store and get Tamiflu, which is one of the antiviral agents we use to combat influenza? The truth is that we deal with the swine flu, influenza, just like we do influenza A every year. What we actually have is influenza A, which is an old friend that we address every fall. Influenza A is of concern to us because every year 38,000 people, mostly seniors, die of influenza pneumonia. That's a big number. And for that reason, we encourage everyone to get their flu shots. Prevention is the key. We need to approach this with the same common sense approach that we do to influenza every year. Wash our hands. Wash our hands for about 15 or 20 seconds. Sing a song while you're washing your hands to be sure that you scrub them well with soap. Cover your mouth when you sneeze or cough. Make sure that you wash your hands after you sneeze or cough. Be sure that the tissue that you use to cover your mouth or your nose is disposed of properly. And be cautious of surfaces that are near people who are coughing or sneezing. The influenza virus can subsist for about 2 hours on a surface. Some people say 3 hours. So that what people will do is touch that surface, then touch their nose, touch their mouth. That's how the influenza virus is transmitted person to person. Many people have asked me, well, should we not eat pork? And the fact is that pork products have nothing to do with the dissemination of swine flu. When pork is properly cooked to the temperature that it's supposed to be, it kills the influenza virus. So there's no fear to have that as part of the propagation chain. Probably the main message of this program, because the most serious implication is that there will be some genetic changes that have implications for animal host transmission, from animal host to human and human to human contact, that could be very devastating. But that has not happened. We have the most brilliant people in this country working on vaccines for the bird flu, and we have people working on preventive techniques for a potential swine flu. You've heard references made to the influenza virus, H1N1 virus. And just we'll take a minute or so to tell you what that means. Because even in the national press, people have said it's not correct to call this the swine flu. We should call it what it really is. It's influenza A, H1N1. And what the H and the N stand for are hyaluronidase and neuraminidase. And these are enzymes that are on the coating of the influenza virus, and they determine its ability to enter its host and to replicate. So there are a whole series of viruses that are identified by their coding, H1, H2, H3, H4, or N1, N2, N3. In the swine flu, for example, the majority of influenza viruses are of the H1N1 category, although recently, as of 1998, the swine flu has also been identified as an H3N2 influenza virus. And of interest is that we can now develop vaccines to the H3N2 virus, but we are unable to develop vaccines to the H1N1 virus. Now, that's of theoretical importance, and it's important to researchers, but what do we do here in Nassau County? What does this mean for us? And as I mentioned, we need to take a common sense approach to the swine flu. Common sense approach is to be sure that you prevent the propagation of the disease. Cover your mouth, wipe your nose, dispose of your tissues properly, protect yourself from surfaces that have been exposed to people who are coughing or sneezing. The incubation period of this virus is about 24 to 48 hours, and the disease lasts about 7 days. So people can catch this disease from the day before the illness is detected until 7 days into the illness. We think that the virus is shed from day 1 through day 5 or 6. Now, what have I seen here in the practice? Well, I've seen people call up and say, "Doctor, I may be exposed to the swine flu, can I come over and get a test right away? I want to be tested. Well, the fact is that there is a general serologic test for influenza A, but there's no test that's readily available to us in the community for the swine flu. If we think that there's a possibility that as a patient you might have swine flu, we have to take a respiratory swab, have to send it to the county health department. It has to be specially prepared. And as we learned today, the county is taking this seriously, but only for people who are seriously ill and in the hospital. So there's no real test that one can have. One can look at the symptoms of influenza, which I'm sure you're all familiar with: fever, muscle ache, nausea, sore throat, general viral type illnesses that fit together with a pattern of being exposed to somebody who had influenza, or in this particular instance, somebody who's been to Mexico or been around somebody that's been in Mexico. And the treatment, there are 2 antiviral agents, Tamiflu and Relenza, that we can use. And what those antiviral agents do is prevent the propagation of the virus, or the replication of the virus. Now people will say, well, let me take Tamiflu so I don't get swine flu. Well, that's fine if you're already infected with the virus, but if the virus isn't in your body, it's going to not do you much good. So that would be a waste of good resources to take Tamiflu for a period of time and think that you're protected. One would only be protected if you are reasonably certain that you've been exposed to the virus and have early sign of the disease. No vaccine has been available for the H1N1 swine flu virus. That's something that will be contemplated by people at the CDC. The difficulty with that, and this is probably difficult to explain at one sitting, but the influenza virus, what makes it so sneaky is that it changes so rapidly. And in each generation of influenza virus, there is a genetic change, and it makes it a new virus. This is why when we give influenza vaccines every year, we can't keep the ones that are left over and use them the next year, because it's a different strain. It has a different covering, has a different genetic makeup. It's a different organism. And the vaccines are very, very specific. I hope that I was able this evening to demystify this whole issue of the swine flu. It's very scary, because when you listen to the press, this sounds like it's overwhelming, that it's imminent, that we're at the edge of some great demise, and that simply is just not the case. There's a lot of fear. I hear it from patients, I hear it from people that I talk to socially. They all ask me if this is really as bad as we're led to believe. And I think about what Franklin Delano Roosevelt said. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. There is no evidence right now, no evidence at all, that we're on the edge of a major pandemic. Is it possible? Who knows? The table is set for the propagation of a disease, but it can be thwarted by the use of just plain common sense. And that's got to make us all feel well. Now, every year we deal with influenza A, and every year 38,000 or so seniors die from influenza A. That's what we deal with every year. That's a lot more scary to me. And it's important, that's why we doctors and health people encourage our patients to get a flu shot every year. Take a common sense approach to dealing with this post-seasonal outbreak of influenza. We should have no major issues and should have nothing to worry about. Everything else is theoretical. If you want more information about the swine flu, you can talk to your family physician, your primary care provider. You can look at the CDC website. They have an up-to-date information about this swine flu. But be confident. All is not what it seems, and common sense should be our recourse at this point. This is Dr. George Blotti. Thank you for tuning into this special program. We hope that this has been helpful. Just follow common sense and stay healthy.